Welcome to our short answer questions presentation. My name is Maria Schimmel. I work for Academic Technologies as the Online Testing Center Supervisor.
And I'm Devshika Bose, and I work as an instructional design consultant with Academic Technologies. And Maria and I are going to facilitate this presentation today.
The first question that you should ask yourself is, what are you hoping to learn from this presentation? Do you have specific goals in mind?
The other things that you have to consider is when you're trying to write a short answer question, what is the most difficult thing that you face? Also, what is the most easy thing that you face when you are trying to write a short answer question? What are short answer questions? That is an important thing to consider. Short answer questions are usually designed to recall specific information, and it has a limited number of correct responses. Usually, questions which intended to be short answer should have enough information about what you expect your students to answer. For example, if you want only 4 reasons for why a particular phenomenon occurs, then your question should start with something like list 4 reasons why. Short answer questions are usually really good if you're trying to assess your students' basic knowledge and understanding of content.
So what are short answer questions? First off, they really don't have a generic structure, so the answers could be in any format, usually in sentences, bullet points, descriptions, diagrams, or even fill in the blank. You'll want to make sure that you use action words in every single one of your short answer questions. Examples of these are list, compare, explain, name, describe, discuss, draw, or show work.
When should you use short answer questions? Usually when you want to test your students' knowledge or comprehension of particular content in a really fast way, when you don't have much time, then the choice of short answer questions is probably a good option. Also, short answer questions are usually quite easy to write, so if you want a quick determination of whether your students have understood, then perhaps you can use short answer questions. Also, the short answer format is pretty familiar to most students. Therefore, it is easier for them to understand what you're asking for than perhaps other systems of evaluation, like say essays or multiple choice questions, which might not be they might not be familiar with that. Short answer questions usually don't allow your students to guess because you're looking for a very specific answer. Therefore, it is a good assessment of your students if it is well written. Continuing with when we should use and should not, we are now going to focus on when we should not use short answer questions. Usually, if your question requires an open-ended format as an answer, open-ended answer, for example, you're asking your students to analyze a situation or to evaluate a situation where there's no correct one correct answer, then perhaps short answer is not a good option. Also, if you're testing for deep concepts, then it is better to use other options like essays or project-based learning to assess your students. Students who have bad handwriting or typing skills usually don't perform well in short answer tests, so that's not a good way to evaluate their understanding. Also, if you don't have much time, then even to write a short answer question with few sentences require time, and therefore if you don't have time, then don't use short answer questions.
For designing your short answer question, the first and foremost point is to make sure that your question is set to assess a learning objective, that it is on point with what you have taught in your class and very specific for it. You want to make sure that there's clear wording on the example. And this comes with cultural considerations. If you have students who speak English as a second language, they might not have strong English skills yet. And also, if it's wording that you haven't used in the class before, the student might be unsure of what you're asking. Also, make sure that you write your question with only one answer or a limited number of possible correct responses. That way, there will be less room for confusion or misunderstanding if the student is apt to overthink the question or over-answer the question and waste time on the exam. You'll also want to make sure to specify the length of the answer. If you tell the student you only want 4 bullet points, then they will only give you 4 bullet points and move on to the next question. Marking style is important to instruct the students on, so make sure to include in your question that you do want bullet points or sentences or a diagram, or they need to show their work in order to get full credit. The more specific you are, the better chance of success your students will have. And then as a backup, always expect there to be some other answer. There's always the chance that somebody might think through the question the wrong way or logically answer it in a different way than you thought they were going to. So do expect a little flexibility on the type of answers that you might receive.
Continuing with the design of short answer questions, it is better to ask your students to list certain items in their answer, so that kind of limits the number of items that they can provide as a feedback. Also, it is a better idea to write your own questions. Some instructors often use questions which are available with the textbook. Those questions your students may not be familiar with, the structure of the questions, the writing, or the language. So your students are familiar with your way of speaking in your classroom, so it is a better idea to write your own questions. Also be careful not to use too much of negative phrasing in your questions. This is because your students who are in a testing environment are already tense and they're short of time. So it's a better idea not to use words like not or expect, which are basically accept, which is basically a negative word, because students in a confused state are likely to not pay attention to the negative phrasing and therefore not produce the right answer. In case that you must use negative phrasing, make sure that you highlight those negative words so that your students' attention are provided in that part of the sentence and they can answer it correctly if they know the answer. Direct questions are usually better rather than completing the sentences because they are less confusing to your students in a testing environment, and your students are likely to answer the question if they know it. Answers which require numerical responses, it is better that you provide the instruction that they will require specific units as part of the answer. So specify that units are required for the answer to be correct. If you're an instructor who provides partial credits to students who demonstrate the process of a problem-solving task, for example in math or science, then make sure that your students know that. Also, if you are an instructor who cares only about the correct answer and is very product-based, let your students know about that so that they know how to answer your question appropriately.
And as for all questions, avoid giving clues to your students as to what the correct answer is. A couple of quick tips for this are using a versus an could influence your student's answer. If you use the word and, they might know that the answer begins with a vowel. Also, plural language versus singular language could give your student a clue as to what the correct answer is. And using the same voice or tense throughout the question also helps a lot in not only not tipping off your student as to what the answer could be, but also not confusing them. If you like to pull questions from the book, but also like to add your input to them, so it's half the book's voice and half of your voice, that could potentially confuse the student, and they could answer incorrectly just because they didn't read the question rather than they didn't actually know the answer. This is a good point to review the slides, see if you have any questions or if we've covered all the material. Next, we're going to move into some examples of short answer questions.
These examples that we are going to discuss are from the BYU website. If you want to look at the source, then you can go to Google and search BYU and then short answers. That will lead you to more information, and they also have good resources about how to write short answers, multiple choice questions, essay type questions. So it is a good resource for you to use in case you want to know more about test question writing.
For these examples, we're going to show you an example of a short answer question, and we're going to give you a few moments to analyze it and see if maybe there's something that could have been written better or if it's a great question. After a few moments, we'll move on to our analysis of the question and we'll go over it and then on to the next example.
Okay, question number 1. This is an example. So it says, explain in some depth each of the probable causes of the Civil War. Okay, this question that we just read about could probably be written better as list 3 probable causes of the Civil War. Now this is a better example because it's specific. It tells the student that only 3 examples need to be listed. It is not a vague, open-ended question so that the students don't end up writing a long essay when they're just required to write a short answer response.
Example number 2, list 2 ways in which neutrons and protons differ. This example is actually a really good one. It's very precise. It asks you to list and then 2 ways, and then it's very clear in the answer content and format expectations in which neutrons and protons differ. There's not a lot of room for confusion here. You know how to answer the question as a student, and then as a faculty member, it'll be an easy question to grade.
Question number 3 says, describe each of the 12 steps in fungal budding. A better way to write this question would have been describe in 2 or 3 steps the process of fungal budding. Now this is a better way to write this question because it's short. The student is expected to write only 2 or 3 ways, 2 or 3 steps and not the 12 steps. So it's not a big essay type question. It's a small short answer questions and the expectations are clear to your students.
Example number 4. Why do trees have rings? As a better example, we could ask, how do trees physically make rings? Explain your answer in 2 or 3 sentences. So the previous bad example, why do trees have rings, is very vague. Students could take that question any direction and they could probably write you a whole novel full of answers. So you want to be very specific considering the time that you have and what your learning objective was. So to ask, how do trees physically make rings? There's only one answer for that. And then for your instructions, explain. You're asking your students to explain in 2 or 3 sentences. So you're telling them exactly what you expect the answer to look like.
Question number 5. Correct the grammatical and spelling errors in this sentence by rewriting it correctly. Denny's truck ain't here yet. Okay, this is a comparatively good example of a short answer question because it's quite clear, precise and short. The students really know what they need to do, that is correct the English and write it in the correct way. So this is probably a better example.
Example number 6. Describe the process of writing an objective classroom test. So for a better example, you could probably say, list the 4 steps in writing an objective classroom test. The first bad example of describe the process of writing, although it does use an action word and it notes that you want to process, it leaves the question very open-ended. The student, again, could just write a huge response and maybe they hit the nail on the head and get the answer right, or maybe they go completely the wrong direction. So with this better example, we're asking for a short response. We want them to list, and then we want 4 steps in writing an objective classroom test. So we're asking for a specific response from the student in order for them to get full points.
Example number 7 reads, who developed the 1916 Stanford Binet Intelligence Scale? A better example would be for this question, to be written as what is the full name of the person who developed the 1916 Stanford Binet intelligence test, intelligence scale. Now this second example is a better example than the former one because the earlier one didn't allow for the students to understand what they were really expected to respond to. Here, this question says that what is the full name? So the students know that that is what the question asks for.
Example number 8. What is the area of a circle having a diameter of 8 inches? Although that previous question was pretty direct, a better example is, what is the area in square inches of a circle that has a diameter of 8 inches? This question indicates that for the student to get full credit, they need to answer not only the area, but also the correct units. So the answer will say a number in square inches.
So this is the end of our presentation. If you have any questions on how to write better test questions, please contact your instructional design consultant. And if you have any testing related questions, please contact Maria Schimmel at the BSU Testing Center.
Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.